This is the Saturday Action broadcast here in the House of Justice on WLIB 1190 AM. Thank you for those announcements, and let's kick off the action with Alan Ponder, head of the HIV/AIDS Committee, with our civil rights highlights.
Good morning, brothers and sisters, listeners and viewers. The civil rights segment is on how slaves built the White House. At the Democratic National Convention earlier this week, nominating a former First Lady as its candidate for the presidency, as usual, our First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, spoke the truth. This time she spoke the truth in her remarks about slave labor being used in the building, the White House, her home, for the past 7.5 years. She said, I quote, "I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves." Surely this part of her convention speech was meant to illustrate some of the changes in the status of African Americans over the years. Instead, many people were offended. Still others refused to believe what she had said. Between 1790 and 1800, the presidential White House in Washington, D.C. was built by African American slaves. The federal government rented slaves from plantations in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Some 385 different slave owners rented slaves to the United States government to do White House construction. Of course, the free mathematician Benjamin Banneker, who did indeed help survey the territory of Washington, was not expected to do physical labor. Black people were the sources of human energy and muscle, which converted paper drawings to real buildings. African American slaves sawed the lumber. Great amounts of marble had to be located, quarried, carried some 40 miles from Stafford, Virginia to Washington, D.C., and cut, sanded, refined, and attached to brick walls and foundations. Slaves made the thousands upon thousands of nails and bricks used in this mammoth project. James Hogan, the actual architect of the White House, charged the government for the services of his own personal slaves that were used in the building. The scores of contractors usually submitted multiple bills to the commission, including slave rental, equipment rental, and supervision fees. Records of many of these transactions still exist in the National Archives of the Library of Congress. Following Mrs. Obama's speech, one prominent commentator attempted to minimize the impact of her comments by saying that these enslaved workers at least were, quote, well-fed. Some were, but some were not. Slaves in the quarries lived in makeshift huts. Those in the city might have lived in slightly better huts and cabins. Most of the skills that black workers brought to the city of Washington were developed on the plantations, where they did the construction work, be it the slave owner's house or the plantation's barns and support buildings, or the construction and maintenance of equipment. In short, they did the physical work that their owners avoided. Even during the dozens of slave stone cutters, brick masons, carpenters, plasterers, roofers, and other tradesmen finished their work, the White House was called the Temple of Liberty. It was intended to be the largest and finest home in North America. The completed building was originally referred to as the Presidential Palace or Presidential Mansion. John Adams became the first president to take residence in the building on November 1, 1800. However, by 1811, the first evidence of the public calling it the White House emerged because of the white painted stone exterior. In 1814, during the War of 1812, much of Washington, D.C. was burned down by British troops, and the White House was gutted, leaving only the exterior walls standing. Many of the same slave renting contractors were involved in its reconstruction. Whether owned or rented, these enslaved African Americans had no civil rights, no civic voices in the society in which they labored. This would be changed by the Civil War north and south of the White House and the U.S. Capitol. The true Temple of Liberty, the civil and human rights are still under construction by those right here in the House of Justice and elsewhere. Our First Lady reminded us that history and truth matters. Let us face them both together.
In the House at National Action Network are the things